Good morning, guys. So, we have some weird lighting. Whoa, it's bright. I'm being a tad bit blinded. In today's video, we're going to do another read and commentary video where I'm going to read, this time instead of reading a book, I'm going to read a book series and then I'm going to give you commentary on it. Last time when I filmed this type of video, I read Pieces of Her by Karen Slaughter, and that book was so confusing. The books that I'm sure you could kind of see peeking over here, I have read majority of them before, except for this one. So we're gonna read the Hunger Games series by Suzanne Collins. I've never read the Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes. This is a new book to my book collection, a new edition, and I'm really excited to read it. As you can see, it still has like the slip cover on it, which for my Hunger Games series, I took all the slip covers off because I just prefer them to, like, look how pretty it looks, you know? So I'm really excited to read this book, like really, really, really excited. If you watched my video of my 2022 reading list of what I read for that year, you'll already know that I reread these books. These were the first books that I ever read. I was like 12 years old, and so these books hold a lot of meaning for me because this is like a prequel, comes before the Hunger Games series. And so what I was going to do for this video is read the Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes first, and then reread the Hunger Games and see if I have any different thoughts, opinions, feelings, emotions, because these books are very emotional for me to read. I hope you guys really enjoy this video. This will be the 15th book that I read this year, then 16th, 17th, 18th. I really do like to reread a lot of books every single year, as well as new books that I've never read before. And so I feel like this is the perfect way of like combining new books with rereading old books. Last time when I was reading Pieces of Her, I read like the first chapter with you guys, but it took so much time and energy and so much filming, and that video was so long. Although I saw so many people loved it, I was like, this time around, I'm just going to read a chapter and then update you guys and show you guys how and what my opinion is for each and every chapter. So I really hope you guys enjoy this video, and yeah, I can't wait. Okay, so I just finished chapter 1, and I'll just kind of give you guys like a brief analysis of what happened in chapter 1. So, Coriolanus Snow, which we all know as President Snow from the Hunger Games series, if you've read that series before. I am not sure if you should read the Hunger Games series first and then read the prequel, or read the prequel and then the Hunger Games series. I decided to do the prequel first and then the Hunger Games series this time, since I have read the Hunger Games series so many times before. First thing that I realized is that Snow, just like in the Hunger Games series, is really self-obsessed, like very concerned about money, very concerned about his hierarchy in society and where he belongs and where he should be. But it also shows that his grandma, who is very imperial, as they say, has those same behaviors, and therefore that's where he obviously gets it from. I already know who Tigress is, and you wouldn't know that Tigress is Snow's cousin unless you read the Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes. Such a strange but very quirky individual is related to Snow, who's very much so proper and pris, and they're cousins, and they had such a close relationship. So I'm like, what happened? Snow also happens to be poor in his socialite group. Like, he is the poor one among the socialites in his group, which is weird for future books, and his like whole way of like doing stuff. Like, it's just strange to sit down, guys. I was like kneeling, but like, he essentially grew up poor, so it's so weird that he still, after all this time, has this strong imperial sense of being like higher than or deserving of more than other people. We basically get to a point in the first chapter where they're talking about they want to make the Hunger Games more unique, and this is the 10th Hunger Games that takes place, I believe. So during the fact that this is the 10th Hunger Games that has happened, they're talking a lot about how District 11 attacked the Capitol, and basically everything since then has been kind of hard to rebuild. So now they want to make the Hunger Games more interesting, because if they don't, like, people are going to lose interest, essentially. And a lot of people within the Capitol don't really enjoy watching the Hunger Games, because they said that within the Capitol it's a really sad event, but also within the districts it's a really sad event. So you don't see that in the Hunger Games series, though, that it's such a weird, sad event for the Capitol. You almost see it being rejoiced and super celebrated, and like this whole event that everybody wants to like partake in, except for the districts. And so they've basically taken, I guess, 12th graders, and told them, hey, you can be mentors for the game. Basically, mentors for the Hunger Games will be people that have competed in the past Hunger Games from your own district. So it's really interesting that they're taking people from the Capitol and getting them to mentor people from the districts for the Hunger Games when they've never partaken in the Hunger Games. And so Snow's like, I want to win so I can eventually, he has this idea of eventually becoming president. He wants to be president really bad. His family wants him to be president really bad. It's really strange that they want that for him so bad. And like, he wants a candidate that will be a good competitor. So he's like, I'm hoping for District 1 or 2, because as we know, if you've read the Hunger Games, those are some of the top competitors, because they are a district that has more money. Therefore, they're also specialized in like in fighting and stuff like that. Also said somebody from District 11, because I believe he said District 11 is energy, and then he ends up getting a girl from District 12, which I kind of already knew that this was gonna be about Snow in his life, or Coriolanus, that's his first name. I always thought his first name was Cornelius, but I guess it's Coriolanus. And essentially the person that created the Hunger Games itself is the person that is kind of setting up this whole scenario for them, and chose who is going to be who they are going to mentor for the Hunger Games. The guy that created the Hunger Games is like really messed up, like came in, he's like on, what is it called? I just want to go back and like make sure. Yeah. Okay, so he's like doped up on morphling. You'll hear about morphling a lot, used in both like medicinal ways, but also in like helping people get better ways. And I'm assuming that morphling is only like, it's morphine, right? I'm gonna move on to chapter 2, and I will check in with you guys once I am done chapter 2 and let you guys know what I think about it so far. It is definitely, like, just for the first chapter, I'm already like, it's very good, Honestly, I really, really, really like being honest, my true honest beliefs. I really, really want Suzanne Collins to write a sequel to The Hunger Games, to Mockingjay, you know, because I just want to know what Katniss and Peeta's life turned out like after they went back, you know, to District 12 and settled down together. Like, I know that you get a little snippet of that, but like, I want the whole story. I want to know what their kids are like. I want to know XYZ. There's going to be a lot of spoilers, so I'm going to put it in the title anyways, but like, yeah, I want to know that information. So I'm still very happy for this book, but I would have wanted that book before this, if that makes sense. So eventually I'm hoping that she releases that, because I think everyone who is a Hunger Games fan wants that. I just finished chapter 2, moving on to chapter 3. Chapter 2 was interesting. So in chapter 1, we found out his candidate is from District 12, right? And so then in chapter 2, we find out who his district candidate is, and it's Lucy Bird. I think that's how her name is supposed to be pronounced, and I think it's supposed to be an ode to the birds part in the Songbirds and Snakes. That whole part, like, literally references the title itself, because Lucy gets up, she ends up throwing a snake down the mayor's daughter's dress, and then she goes up on stage and does this whole elaborate charade of like singing essentially that she's against the Capitol and hierarchy and so on and so forth. And then Snow and everyone's watching this in the Capitol, and they're like, holy shit, you know, like, this girl could be a real contender in the Hunger Games. And I think they honestly thought that she was not going to be good, because like most of the District 12 people in the past have just died, you know. And then they see this girl and they're like, whoa, she really has a chance at winning here, or potentially. The mayor comes, he gets like dragged off stage because he ends up like hitting Lucy in the face because of the whole snake incident with his daughter. And then he comes back and we find out who the male contender is, and his name is like Jessup Diggs. The names are really different, like this time around. Like, the names are so hard for me to pronounce and read. So Snow essentially is like at the whole Panem, like, town square where they like watch the Hunger Games. Like the people getting, I don't know how you would say that. It's like a raffle. They pull a name out of the bowl and then you get picked. But it's kind of weird because they definitely knew who the people were before they got picked, you know? So it's like the games are rigged because Snow was told beforehand who the girl contender would be. It didn't mention the boy contender, but the girl contender was already told to him. So that's weird. And I don't know if it's just the recordings get recorded beforehand and then they knew and then they were told before it aired to the Capitol. I have so many mosquito bites. I'm sorry, guys. I'm like itching everywhere. And or if it was a rigged game, which wouldn't surprise me about the Capitol. And so then Coriolanus is getting really hungry, or Snow, in other words. And he's like, I just want food. You know, I've been starving since the Dark Ages, since the war of District 11 attacking the Capitol. The reason why the Hunger Games even exists is because it's supposed to basically, they have like a treason treaty. So like District 11 killed a bunch of people in the Capitol, a bunch of kids. And I feel like that's really full circle for what happens at the end of Mockingjay. What Panem, or in other words, the Capitol, is failing to realize is that every single day there's people dying within the districts. They're starving to death.
And Snow realizes this because he's like, like, we're starving because of District 11. Some people had to turn to literal cannibalism because they're starving to death. And it's just like, you do not hear about that happening in the districts. And those people are literally starving every day. So there's like consequential, like big differences between the two societies. But like at the same time, you guys are going through the exact same scenarios brought on by each other. Like, not one is better than the other type of idea. Although systemically the capital is better off because they have more money, they have freedom of choice and freedom of choosing, so on. And you're kind of seeing that there's kind of illusions that have been made by the capital to like induce this hierarchy that really doesn't exist but does exist. So he's standing there, he's like looking at the food and stuff, talking about how hungry he is, and he's like, I can't allow anyone else around me to realize like how hungry we actually are and how much we are starving. This high bottom guy, I forget what his first name is, but anyways, he's like the one that created the Hunger Games. He comes up to Coriolanus and he's like, basically is taking digs at him, being like, so if you don't win, how are you going to afford to go to university? And he's like, well, we'll just pay for it. And he's like, you most definitely can't pay for it. Which is like a huge bash to like Coriolanus's or / Snow's ego, right? He's like, shit, people do know we're poor. People do know that we're struggling. Which like in their society is, I guess, really frowned upon. Which it really shouldn't be. Everyone struggles, but it's just how their society is made. And he's like really embarrassed. He's like, did the names I called this guy get back to him, and is that why he hates me? And I don't think it's that. I just really don't. It has to be something else. So obviously when I keep reading, I'm sure. I have like 7 mosquito bites on my legs. They're all so itchy. But he said if you go into debt in the capital, it's really bad. Which, I mean, I can see that because of the way the capital is set up. It's definitely not meant for people to thrive in that type of situation. And he said, well, I guess I could be a peacekeeper, but that's like a 20-year commitment, and I'm going to have to go to some poor, animalistic district. And I'm like, dude, you're living exactly how the people in the districts are living right this moment. But except you go home to a mansion every day, and they're going home to a shack. But you're still starving, just barely getting by. And it's just crazy that he has like all these ideals and like these mindsets and thoughts from his own upbringing that he still is holding on to, even though he's literally barely surviving. They have to eat cabbage soup every day in order to not starve. And also like just he's talking about like the dark ages and when like they barely could get food and they're like stockpiling freaking lima beans. Like, dude, what is going on in your head? Like, you are literally in the same exact position as them, except guess what? They didn't have the option to stockpile food, because if they did that, they would be killed on the spot. And I don't know if that's the case within the capital, because we haven't reached that point yet, but I know that's the fact in the districts, because we have seen that happen before within the Hunger Games series. And I'm like, it's just insane to me that he like thinks this way and like has these outrageous mindset. I'm moving on to chapter 3. I've been reading through this book so quickly, which is kind of how it goes when I'm reading the Hunger Games. I always read through these books so insanely fast because they're so interesting, and the chapters are pretty relatively short, although this book is 500 pages. This is a lot bigger than the rest of the books in the series. Like, you can just tell by sizing, as well as, like, the amount of pages. I think most of them end around, like, 300 pages, so.
Oh, I just finished chapter 3, and basically, he went to go to the train station to meet Lucy. And this is all really different because in the Hunger Games books, like I said, the tributes, like their mentors are from the same district. It's the past victors of that district. And they basically get on the train with them and ride to Panem. And then from there, they go to like a really nice hotel, and then they like go to the training facility and everything like that. But in this version of events in the prequel, they don't meet their victors until tomorrow. And so he went to the train station. He saw that the train was in horrible quality. It's like a livestock train, which if you've seen the Hunger Games movies and you've read the books, that's not the same type of setup. Oh, he like meets Lucy and he's like, I'm your mentor, so on and so forth. And she's like making a joke to him, like about, I don't really care. And then he decides that he's gonna go with her in the back of this like literally caged in truck. And then they get dumped out of the truck into the zoo, into the monkey habitat at the zoo. I'm going to keep reading. I'm going to move on to chapter 4. I feel like I've been breezing through this book so quickly, but it doesn't surprise me in the slightest because that's just... Suzanne Collins' writing is amazing. And when it comes to her books, I just read through them so quickly because her chapters are really not all that long, in the way that she writes and she has her books set up. Like, it's just easy to read, and I think that's the most enjoyable thing about it. This is how many pages I have until I get to chapter 5, so that is one of the reasons why I do read through the books so quickly. But yeah, I'm gonna go read chapter 4 and I will get back to you guys when I am done.
Okay, so I just finished chapter 4, moving on to chapter 5. In that chapter, so last thing I said was like they were meeting at the train station, they got dropped into a zoo cage, and then basically Lucy Gray is like, own it. Like, it gives off very much so the same vibe as like Peeta and Katniss in the first book of the Hunger Games, where he's like, just own it, like this is a show, we're the stars of the show type of energy. It really makes me think, like, hypothetically, like, Snow knew exactly what they were doing, and I'm sure he did, and I think we all knew that he did, but it just, like, gives that vibe off even more so, of, like, he knew what was going on, but just didn't say it type of thing, you know? Peacekeepers come, get Coriolanus out of the zoo, and is like, yo, why are you in there? But meanwhile, this is all being broadcasted across the city, and like they're basically like flirting with each other, kind of, but like being like, this is my mentor, this is my tribute type of relationship. Lucy was like talking to like children that were like watching them and inside the cage, and she's like, I'm not from District 12, I'm a Covey, and our people were found and then brought to District 12. And I'm like, this either gives off very much so gypsy vibes, which I know gypsy is not like the correct terminology, but I just want it to make sense for a large majority of people, but like it gives off like traveler, or it gives off like Native American type of vibes, where like they live off the land, they're very whimsical, nature drawn, musical, like musical vibes, very like colorful, loving energy, and just being taken from the land and forced into situations that they shouldn't have been. And so I'm really interested to see more about that story and like
what her life consisted of before being brought to District 12 and how that all is. After Coriolanus gets picked up and brought to basically the head game maker and also his like person that's setting up, the creator of the Hunger Games, he's talking to them and they're like, do you even know why the Hunger Games happens? Like, why do we target children, essentially, quote unquote? This is the conversation they're having. And he's like, well, because children are like the most loved thing in our society. But then he also thinks back and he's like, but there's been times where children are also the most ignored. So he's like, I was dying, quote unquote, in the street with swan flu, and like people were just walking past him, not caring, not giving a crap. And I'm like, I mean, children are the most prevalent in our society, but they're also the most ignored. And so, I don't know. Anyone that's read a Suzanne Collins novel knows that everything she says is very accurate to our real society. And also, the Hunger Games does take place in America, because the Hunger Games takes place on July 4th, which is very interesting because that's Independence Day. But if you know that when Independence Day was created, not everyone within America had independence. So yeah, I don't know, I think it's very interesting. It has a lot of very good context. I think it's very prevalent for real life, even though it's a fictional book. And then also, I just think that there's a lot to learn from like fiction books in general when they take and draw things from real life. Everything that is created has to draw from somewhere, whether it be movies, TV shows, real life events, fictional events, to create something that is connective and well told, if that makes sense. Yeah, I'm really enjoying the story so far. I can't believe I'm already 5 chapters in. This is my second day of reading. And if I read, quote unquote, like 4 chapters in the first day, I definitely feel like I could have read more, to be honest, but I just took a break and really was like just hanging out with family and stuff. So I want to see how much I can read today and how far I can get into the book. And my mosquito bites are still so itchy. They're so bad. I will update you guys when I'm done the 5th chapter. So I just finished chapter 5. It was really good. I just want to say, so one of the classmates of Snow's is actually from District 2, but his family ended up being able to move to the capital because they gained money through some way. And the guy's dad is like super valuable to the capital. So essentially, he's part of the capital. So he went to the whole zoo and gave the tribute sandwiches and stuff. And I felt like there was such a good correlation between the fact of like Katniss and Peeta were classmates and they got put into the games together, and through that they weren't close, but they developed like this friendship connection. Well, I'm not exactly sure how to pronounce his name. I'm not sure if it's Sanjan or Sinjan. I think it's Sinjan. But his classmate Marcus got put into be as a tribute, and he's his mentor, which is such a different dynamic, but also they're going to have to work together in order for him to try and win in the games. And his classmates just ignoring him and being like, I don't really want anything to do with you, which understandable. Their family would be really hated, and that is mentioned among the people in their own district because now they're part of the capital. They don't have to have the same experiences, you know? And then what else did I want to mention? I think it's really interesting to see the whole mentor perspective in general, because we don't really get to see a lot of the mentors
perspective in the Hunger Games series, but in this series, since the book is entirely from Snow's perspective, and he's like trying to see how Lucy Gray is, and like he really wants to make her this icon, but all he really cares about, like truly there'll be moments where he's like caring about her and how she's feeling and what she's going through, but then in the next breath he's talking about how much popularity he could gain from this and how much he could become like an icon from this whole getting this girl that is not a very strong contender in the games but has this huge personality and is very likable, that she could be a top contender. Like he wants to make a legend for himself, and it's just really gross and weird, and at the same time he like wants her to like him. I don't get it, like, but at the same time all he cares about is winning. So I'm like, he's like, is it about winning or is it about putting on the best show and getting people to watch? He's very concerned about those two things, but either way he just wants to be the best of the best and be on top. So I'm going to keep reading. I'm moving on to chapter 6, and then I will update you guys when I am done chapter 6.
Just realized for this whole video I've been wearing braids. I had like a 1-strand braid for like half of this video so far, and now I have 2 braids. Very Hunger Games aesthetic. I don't know why I said it like that. Anyways, I just finished chapter 6. I'm moving on to chapter 7. That chapter was so crazy. So much happened, and like to break it all down, it's way too much info to say, but I'll give you guys a little bit of details of what happened roughly. So Coriolanus keeps visiting Lucy in the zoo, and he's like providing her small gifts of food, and they have like very flirtatious but friendly energy back and forth between each other. And then the next day they had like the initial meet and greet of the tributes and the mentors, of being like, let me ask you information about yourself and like where you're from, what your life was like, who your friends are. And it mentioned a part of like knowing the people that cared about the tributes, and it should have been more detailed and stuff like that. And I was like, that's crazy, because in later books Snow's like, I know everyone that you're close to. It wouldn't be hard for me to find one of them and hurt them, essentially, you know? See, the thing is, when Coriolanus or Snow is around Lucy, he's like a totally different person. He's always looking how to benefit himself. It's very narcissistic energy. But at the same time, he shifts into this more sympathetic, empathetic view mindset. But when he's not with her, he's completely just thinking about how to benefit himself. So narcissistic. Let me sit down. It's odd to me because how are you just like 2 different people, like in the same, like in a matter of literally a few minutes? You can really tell that he likes Lucy and that he wants to get to know her better. So anyways, after they have their initial meeting and they're talking about like her family and stuff like that, and they're like, well, what side did you pick during the war? And she's like, we didn't pick a side, like we just have our own people, the Covey people. And I'm like, I mean, for somebody that wasn't on a side during the war, like didn't stand with District 11 and wanted to hurt people in the Capitol, which the Capitol was hurting the district people to begin with, and that's why they fought back during the war and hurt the Capitol, because they wanted to even the dynamics. And then also didn't choose a side, the side of the Capitol. In the Capitol's eyes, if you're not choosing the Capitol side, you are choosing District 11's side. But in reality, as we know, if you're not choosing a side and you're choosing yourself, that's not how things work. It's kind of messed up that she's in the reaping, or that she got picked in the reaping, and that she is now gonna be a contestant in the Hunger Games because she didn't cause any harm. Like, she literally didn't cause any harm at all. And you actually find out that, like, this is the first time they're having mentors. This is the first time when they're, like, instilling certain things. The person that created the Hunger Games, it was a hypothetical idea. And Highbottom, the guy that did create the Hunger Games, he seems very against the Hunger Games. And now Highbottom and Dr. Whale, I think that's how you pronounce her name. She's the head game maker. She wants to get the mentors to start coming up with ideas for the Hunger Games. And so Snow is sitting there being like, well, I can't afford personally to gift my tribute stuff in the Hunger Games. Like, his family can't afford it because he's the poorest among them all. And he's like, I think I should make it a rule, or basically tell the game makers in Highbottom that it should be a rule that you can't gift your tribute gifts. And I'm like, so I already know that is a rule during the Hunger Games. So I'm seeing that basically Snow had a large hand in creating the Hunger Games that we saw during Katniss and Peeta's time in the Hunger Games. He had a large part in creating that reality. He has such strong regard for something so messed up, but in their society that's just so mundane. It's so normalized. They're just looking at it as a restitution for something that happened to their people. Sanjin, which is, he used to be in the districts and now he lives in the capital. He's like trying to protect the tributes so bad, and he is like, just take me out of being a mentor. I don't want to do this, like, really badly. And they're like, well, that's too damn bad. Like, you're gonna have to. You can tell that he understands that would have been him if he didn't get out of the districts and move to the capital, and he feels a lot of guilt and shame, I think. And then so he's sitting there talking to them, and he's like, if our government exists, why isn't it protecting everyone? Why aren't we all equal, per se? And I think they just, like, don't get it. Like, I don't think that they could ever possibly get it because they've never lived that life. It's true. Unless you've experienced something, you're not going to understand it to the full capacity. Like, you're just not going to. The tributes basically go back to the zoo in the monkey cage. And it kind of reminds me of, if you've heard this song before, like, dance for me, dance for me, dance for me, oh, oh, oh. And then it goes, monkey dance for me. That is exactly like the idea that they're trying to portray, that Suzanne Collins is trying to portray, is that, like, you are a puppet on a string. I control you. I get to tell you what you should and shouldn't do. And so Snow is very aware that he is in control of the situation, because he keeps telling her, oh, sing again, because that made him look highly in favor. And he's like, I know it will only benefit me if she does sing, but maybe possibly somebody will give you food. And it's like, shouldn't food just be something that we have access to? Like, why are we starving people on purpose? Like, it doesn't make sense, you know? Also, regarding all that, what I just mentioned, so all the tributes are in the cage, and all their mentors are standing around the cage, and they're having conversations, and there's this one girl. Okay, her name's Arcane. So it says, Arcane withdrew the sandwich, drawing a laugh from the audience. And then Lucy Gray was like, she's playing with fire there. And so Arcane was like teasing her tribute. She's like giving her the sandwich and then being like, no. And then she took a bite from the sandwich rather than giving it to her tribute. And then the girl basically, there was like a beautiful knife that was placed there. She picked up the knife and killed her. That's where I kind of left off. I was absolutely so shocked that a tribute killed their mentor, because obviously the tributes and the mentors in the Hunger Games series have a relation of them both being reaped into the Hunger Games and also being forced to go through this really, really disturbing event and then having to navigate life after that. Now, with it being capital people mentoring these children, and mind you, they're both children, they have zero relation to each other, as in going through a reaping and getting forced to be in these games and having to navigate life after that if they win. The only thing that they have in common is that they've went through poverty and having to scavenge for food and figure out how they're going to get food and being hungry. The capital people haven't necessarily had the same brutality and fear of what the capital could do to them, or what the peacekeepers would do to them if they didn't follow or oblige the rules. So they just have a very different mentality, and they also don't have that relation because honestly, the capital people have this intense hierarchy, and not just a hierarchy, but they have a view of being like extremely egotistical. Like, they don't want to tell people if they're suffering. They don't want people to know how much money they have. They just want to be seen as wealthy. They don't want anyone to know what's going on in their internal lives. It's just all for show. So in both ways, kind of, they're both putting on a show, if that makes sense. I hope it does. And then, but Suzanne Collins keeps you extremely entertained and wanting to read more. And if I could read this whole entire book in one day, I definitely would. I think it's my third day reading. I think yesterday I said it was my second. So yeah, today's my third day reading. And yesterday I didn't really read that much, but today I want to read a lot more chapters, especially where I just left off. I'm like, I need to read more now. So I will check in with you guys when I am done chapter 7. Okay, so I finished reading chapter 7. I took a little break for a while so I could just chill out and watch some YouTube. But now I'm ready to film my thoughts on what happened in chapter 7. So, Coriolanus, Snow, gets worse and worse and worse as the book goes on. Like, I really thought, for some reason, since Snow was going to be the main character, that he was going to paint himself in a good light, or that Suzanne Collins would want to have would like make Snow look like a better person from his own perspective or anything. But truly, Snow through and through is just a bad person. And you can just tell in everything that he says, every thought he has, every decision he makes, just paints him in such a bad light. And I don't know if it's his audacity of not caring or literally his utter lack of self-awareness, but he is such a bad freaking person. It's just so weird. So anyways, as I said in the last chapter, one of Snow's classmates died, and he's talking about how he's known her since he was a small child and that their families were very close, including their mothers, and therefore they were close as babies. And his only thought after he's trying to save this girl's life, and not even because he initially had the thought, but because Lucy once again was like, go save her. Like, what are you doing? Lucy really gives off the vibe of like, you know, those types of people that are like, I'm only good because of you. I'm only good because I have you. He is so morally gray, but not even like a likable, morally gray character. He's just morally absolute dark and like absent. Like, he has no personality. He has no anything about him that's likable in like any way whatsoever. He's trying to save his classmate, and then he's like, well, she's basically dead, so there's no point in trying to resuscitate her because I think it will just, I'm just like, and then he's talking about how his hands are shaking because of this, and I'm like, you realize that your literal tribute is gonna have to go through this in a matter of days. And he like says that himself, but it's just like, you still are lacking the complete and utter lack of awareness to understand that she more or less may die. Like, and so he goes home. He has like a quick little cry in the shower, he says. And then he decides he's going to start doing the assignment of coming up with ways to make the Hunger Games more enthralling. And you would think it's to atone for the fact of like, your friend just died. Maybe I could understand that a little bit, that you're like, okay, now I can see why the Capitol wants to do this. But no, it's literally just so he can get a good grade. And so he can be more liked. And so he can look more favorable. They're crying, his family's crying and stuff, and he's like, you know, I consoled them and took care of them. It's just like more ego boosts, like to make himself feel good. And it's like, are you missing the point? Like, one of your classmates, one of your family friends literally is dead. Like, what is going on in your head, man? The next day, he finishes writing this paper, and it was supposed to be like a group project. All of his classmates were mourning. None of them did this little group project thing except for him. And so the other sole survivor from his group project, he ends up telling her, like, I did the project, and she's like, I don't even know how you did that. Like, I was crying all night. And he's like, well, it was the only thing to keep me from freaking out and losing it. I couldn't sleep. And it's like, he was very defensive. That's how it came off. And like, in reality, maybe that's how he felt, but I really just don't believe that to be so. He's very like, I don't know if this is offensive or not, but he's like very psychopathic or like sociopathic. Like, he is missing core fundamentals of his personality that make him make him human. So he goes and drops the paper off to Dr. Gwale, and they go to class, and he's walking through the school, and this is just the part where I'm like, you are such a bad person. He's like, you know, we weren't close, but all these people are like giving him condolences and telling him how he's a hero, and he's like, oh, like getting ego boosts from it type of thing. And he's like, you know, you shouldn't speak ill of the dead, and like explain we weren't really that close, but you're straight up lying. Like, you don't have to speak ill of the dead to be like, you know, I just wanted to do the right thing, or like we weren't really actually that close, but like I saw somebody in need and wanted to help, even though that wasn't even his mindset. After that, he gets like called to Dr. Gwale, and they're talking about the assignment and stuff, and I think she is aware that he's the only one that wrote it and his partner didn't, although she's like, cover for me. And then she's kind of like taking over and kind of boasting for herself, you know, type of idea. And he's like getting kind of a little mad, not really like mad, but he's getting like frustrated with her because he's like, girl, you literally did nothing. I did all the work. And that's kind of roughly where I left off. I'm really interested to see what chapter 8 brings to the table. So today is day number 4, although it's like almost 12 in the morning, and I have literally only read 1 chapter today, which understandably so. I've been extremely tired today, and I've just felt off in general. Like, my chronic illness is kicking my booty today, and I have been so tired. My throat is low-key kind of irritated. It's been semi-irritated all day. Not really like a sore throat, but just irritated. So anyways, I haven't really done much reading because I've just been taking it easy, taking care of myself. And I also woke up with this really weird rash on my arm today. Bunch of popped blood vessels. Don't know what's happening there, but something is. So anyways, let's get into the actual stuff that you're here for, that you want to hear about. So I finished chapter 8, moving on to chapter 9. This is the first time within the book so far that I feel like Coriolanus has actually showed emotion and human behaviors that is normal for a human. I don't know why I'm being so sassy, but like, damn, it's true though. Anyways, he was visiting Dr. Quayle with this girl named Clemenes. Clemnesia. He was visiting Dr. Quayle, and they were talking about the proposal, and then she told the 2 students to stick their hand in a tank with snakes. Well, Snow was fine. He stuck his hand in and got the proposal out, so on and so forth. The other girl did the same, and she got bit by the snakes. And he's like, is she gonna die? And Dr. Quayle's like, maybe. Like, what do you mean maybe? You're supposed to be their literal, like, mentor, mentoring them to mentor the tributes. Like, what do you mean? Snow's like, it's almost like we're having our own Hunger Games where the students are all, like, dying. And I'm like, I was already thinking that, like, low-key. I was like, Suzanne Collins is just sadistic enough to do something like that to her characters, where the Capitol students are gonna have to go through like their own Hunger Games and see who's the best of the best to be like, you know, take over the Hunger Games or something. Something is gonna happen, not sure yet, but I just knew something like that was gonna happen, where they're gonna like slowly kill off the students. Getting back to the whole Snow thing and actually having human emotions and normal behaviors, he's like worried about this girl, which, how are you more worried about her than literally your lifelong friend that died? Weird, but okay. So he like rushes over to the hospital, checks her out and stuff, and he's like, she looks messed up. But she's alive. And he's like, I think she'll live. The think she'll live part was a little unsettling, but okay. Then after that, he's like, I need to talk to somebody about this. So he goes to Lucy Gray, and she's like very ill. She's like, can't barely stand, can't barely function. There's a bunch of rats everywhere. They have poison everywhere for the rats, but the rats are not eating the poison. They're just scurrying around. It's just all so disturbing. And once again, the topic of like people dying in the streets and them rats eating them is like brought up. Gives Lucy Gray some crackers, and this is the first part where you actually see him having like a real connection with her, because he's like, I'm so sorry that this is happening, you know, this is low-key my fault, like I'm creating the games, I'm helping them. And like, dude, why is it taking you now to come to this conclusion that like you are literally creating the games? Like, you just submitted a proposal to help the tributes, but also help the game makers and help yourself. Like, you're so ultimately selfish that you can't even understand that this is your fault. Snow ends up leaving the zoo, and he meets up with Persephone. I I think her name's like Persephone or something like that, actually. Persephone's dad is the one that, like, he's one of the people that committed cannibalism during the Dark Ages, and he's like, I'm repulsed by her. Like, he's like repulsed by her, and he's like, she's like the most beautiful girl in our class, but like I could never imagine kissing her because her dad committed cannibalism, and like I don't know if she knows or not that she literally ate a person, but regardless, it's gross. And we're not gonna say hypotheticals here if it's worse to eat a body that's dead or kill literal children for the sake of fun, but they both are equally repulsive. They're both equally disturbing. I'm gonna go read part of chapter 9 and then go to bed because it's getting late and I've been so tired all day long. Anyways, I just finished chapter 9. Chapter 9 was kind of just a build-up plot. A lightning strike just went off literally right in front of me. So it's about to storm outside, so I came out here to read because I'm like, isn't that the best weather for reading anyways? It's like stormy, rainy, cloudy. So chapter 9 was like building up to the plot. As you guys can hear, it's thundering, to like the final parts before they enter the Hunger Games. And so anyways, they had the mentor's funeral, and they basically brought all the tributes to the mentor's funeral and had them like stand up there and like also like put that girl's body who killed the mentor's body like up on display. It was so weird. And so they have the funeral, they're all like sitting there talking, enjoying each other's company, and then after the funeral, not very much happens. It's just a lot of like plot details that are just not super important to the storyline. And then after that part, they actually are going to like the Hunger Games arena and like where they can like sit and watch the Hunger Games take place. And Coriolanus is recounting how he remembers watching the Hunger Games as a kid and like going through into the arena like where they're at currently, and he's talking to Lucy Gray and he's like, here, take this food, it's extra food, so on and so forth. Not too much honestly has happened, I would say, in that chapter. Various plot details about the Hunger Games in the past and now what they're trying to do for the Hunger Games now, and that's about it. So I just finished chapter 10, moving on to chapter 11. In the last chapter, it was pretty intense. So they're inside the arena. I'm not exactly sure why they're inside the arena, but anyways, bombs start going off. They're not sure if people are dropping bombs or if the bombs were already planted there. They're assuming that they were already planted by the districts during the war, I'm guessing, because they didn't really state that it was during the war. They just said it had to have been at some point after the last Hunger Games or within the last couple of months, because they close and lock the arena after every single Hunger Games. Coriolanus was hurt during the bombing, and this piece of this plank of wood fell on top of him that was on fire. Lucy saves his life. He's in the hospital recovering and stuff, and the whole time he's just worried about Lucy. Is she still alive? Is she okay? Is she getting proper health care type of idea? And nobody's really giving him updates or anything like that. And Clemencia, I don't know how you say her name, the girl that got bit by all the snakes, comes to visit him, and she's like, my family hasn't come to visit me. What's going on? He's like, I've seen your family, so on, so forth. she's like, be careful, like they're trying to kill us, or they're trying to kill me. And then a doctor comes in the next day and they're like, oh, we heard that Clemencia came to visit you. I'm sure she gave you a fright. Yeah, the antidote gives really weird side effects because she had like this weird, colorful snake, scaly skin that was lightning. And they basically just said that they've been lying to her parents, saying that she's under like a flu. She's quarantined because of a flu, essentially. It's weird because, like, why not just tell her parents what happened? But that makes the Capitol look bad, and that makes the head game maker look bad, because it 100% wasn't an accident. It was something on purpose. So then after that, a bunch of tributes died. That was a lot of thunder. It shook the whole house. A bunch of tributes died during the whole bombing incident, and so did a bunch of mentors. So they held a funeral for the mentors that died, and Snow didn't go to the funerals. He just, I don't know, he watched them or something on TV. He went home, he's like recovering, and then Highbottom and I'm guessing Dr. Gwale called in like the remaining mentors and tributes, and he's like, a lot of people don't have tributes anymore, and there's a lot of mentors that are dead, so there's no mentor for certain tributes. Like, what are we gonna do? And people are kind of coming up with suggestions, like, should we do another reaping and get more tributes from the districts? And Coriolanus is sitting there with Lucy, and he's like, you saved my life. And she's like, is that what you're telling people? And he's like, well, I told my family that. And she's like, he gave her some food, and he's like, is this how I'm gonna like repay her for saving my life? Like, that's so meaningless type of idea. And then he's like, how could I repay you for saving my life? And she's like, you could start by actually believing that I have a chance of winning in this game. And I'm like, ooh. It also reminds me of like in the Hunger Games, PETA. Nobody believed that PETA like actually had a fighting chance, but they all believed Katniss did. And like PETA says something along the same lines where he's like, actually believe that I have a chance of winning. And so we will see. I am near the end of page 169, and I have 2 pages to go until I reach chapter 12, but I just wanted to add this in because I feel like this is such an amazing reference to the last book, which is Mockingjay. So this is what it says. You know what they say. The show's not over until the Mockingjay sings, she said. The Mockingjay, he laughed. Really? I think you're just making these things up. Not that one. A Mockingjay's a bona fide bird, she assured him. And it sings in your show, he asked. Not my show, sweetheart. Yours. The Capitol's anyway, said Lucy Gray. I think we're up. With her clean dress and his neatly pressed uniform, their very appearance brought a spontaneous round of applause from the audience. He didn't waste time asking her a lot of questions. And then I'm on to the next page. I guess I'll just give you guys an update now since I have 2 pages left until chapter 12. So in the last chapter, they were getting ready for interviews and having them, and Snow is really preoccupied with finding Lucy Gray a guitar. He found her one. He actually found her one through Pilburus. I think that's who it is, which sounds familiar. I don't know who Pilburus is, though. Maybe I'll get a refresher when I'm reading the Hunger Games series, but the name sounds very familiar. I just can't pinpoint where it's from. The next day is basically the interviews, and Flickerman, Lucretius, I forget, they say it in the movies. He goes by Lucretius or Lucky Flickerman. I don't remember him going by Lucky Flickerman in the Hunger Games books. I just remember him going by Lucretius, or however you pronounce his name. The names are so hard to pronounce. Like, I actually struggle so much with pronouncing the names properly, and refer to him as like the host of the Hunger Games interviews. It's really interesting that he's hosting the Hunger Games that Snow is mentoring in, and then he also is the host of the Hunger Games in Katniss and Peeta. Like, he's been doing it for years at this point. It's also interesting because Tigress, Tigress is older than Snow, but in the Hunger Games books, Tigress looks to be like 30, 40 years old, but that also could be because she had a lot of plastic surgery done. And in this book, like I said, she's a little bit older than Snow, but she looks younger in the movies than Snow. But she's clearly older than Snow, and Snow's like an old man, so that means Tigress was like an old woman, like old. So I'm realizing a lot of different things about the books and like their correlations. I really don't know where this book is leading. So Flickerman was explaining the new rules for the Hunger Games. Like, you can bet on tributes, like ponies, like race ponies, right? Or race horses or whatever. You bet money on the horse that you think is going to win. So same idea. So they said you have like 12 hours, 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. to mail in your bets. And then that basically makes like the Hunger Games free for the Capitol, so they don't have to like pay money into it and like so on and so forth. But it also, I believe it gives your tribute higher odds, because then they get like gifts and like other stuff for the tribute during like the process of being in the Hunger Games, just like in the Hunger Games series. I will check in with you guys again when I'm done reading chapter 12. Okay, so I just finished chapter 12. I'm moving on to chapter 13. Quick description of what happened in chapter 12. Lucy did her performance for the interview. She sang a song. Snow got jealous because it was about her life story and she had mentioned a past lover. And honestly, I don't think she was actually mentioning a past lover. I think it was almost like a signal to the people, to her people back in District 12, saying like giving them a little message. I can't really explain to you what the exact message would have been or what she was trying to convey to them, because she doesn't really give that information. She did mention a lover, and she also mentioned almost or hinted at doing acts of disgrace, as Snow said, in order to keep her family afloat or keep herself alive, because her parents have been dead for a long time. And so she would have had to find means of taking care of herself. And I'm sure you guys can put two and two together of what I am referring to, which this alludes to a lot older audience than what the original Hunger Games books were written for. I feel like the original Hunger Games series was written for 12 and up, and this book I would say was written for more of like 15, 16 and up. But it kind of makes sense because Suzanne Collins would be aware that her audience who read the original Hunger Games series, which when the Hunger Games came out or became popular, I was 12 and now I am 23 when the Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes came out. Actually, it came out in 2020, so I was 20 years old. But like, as you can see, I'll look up the original date of when the actual Hunger Games came out. So Snow got really jealous that Lucy had sang this song about a past lover in her life and so on and so forth. And he was kind of pissed off, and so he goes to Tigress and he's like, don't you think this was like a bad thing for her to like allude at the fact that she did these deeds in order to survive? And he's like, Tigress is like, be kind, Snow. You don't know who else around you had to do unspeakable things in order to just survive. And he's like, did Tigress have to do unspeakable things for us to survive? And he also mentioned this like at the very beginning of the book as like a joke, but it's like, what if she did? Like, I feel like there's certain words that I can't say on YouTube, but certain professions regarding 18 plus content, or people using their body as a means of making money, are really frowned upon within our society in general. And I feel like those people are looked at as very indecent and shamed, and it's very much so alluding to those types of ideas and constructs of like that we have such a tainted view of women and men as well who are inside in those types of industries, and or are doing those things as a means of surviving or getting by, or are doing those things because of other reasons, due to their own suffering. And I don't know, it's a very eye-opening perspective, and a very different perspective than I think the large majority of the population or people have regarding those topics. So forth, I want to say, after that whole conversation takes place, they're preparing more so for the Hunger Games, right? And so after Snow has that conversation with Tigress, I feel like he really was like, those types of actions could be more likely to anyone that's in a compromising position. And the next big thing that I want to mention is that, so we're basically literally counting down days till the Hunger Games. I don't know if it's a day, a couple of days, but we know that it's happening very, very soon. And Lucy Gray, you finally see her break down and show emotion regarding the Hunger Games, and she's talking about the people around her and how they're acting different, and she refers to one of the tributes as saying that like he's sorry that he has to kill all of the other tributes, but he promises that he will take revenge on the Capitol. Obviously, to take revenge on the Capitol would be treasonous. It would be so hard to do that in this time frame. You also see how they're preparing for the Hunger Games, and now they have the drones that fly in and bring gifts and so on and so forth. And he's talking to Lucy Gray and she's crying and she's like, I don't want to die. And he's like, you have the most gifts. You have triple the gifts of everyone else going into the arena. And she's like, kind of trying to, I think to herself and hype herself up of being like, maybe I do have a chance of winning, even though I really feel as though during the daytime I have this chance of winning, but at nighttime those thoughts hit me of I could potentially die. And I think that's so relatable, because it's really easy for us as human beings to go throughout our day and pretend like we're okay, or to focus on the things around us instead of, sitting there alone with our thoughts and our feelings and stuff like that. But as soon as nighttime hits and we are by ourselves, all those things come rushing in and flooding in, where you just have no escape. So she starts, breaking down crying, and Snow's like, this is my last chance with her. This is the last time I'll see her. So I'm guessing as of tomorrow, she's going into the arena. And he's like, if I don't give her a confession of my love now, like, I might not ever get the chance. And he's kind of referring to him as like his girl, which this is like also the first time you see Snow have feelings outside of himself, although they're still kind of self-serving, because it's like, this might be the last chance that I get to tell her how I feel. But it's not like, it's in a means of comforting her, and not in a means of being like, I need to tell you this because this undying feeling is inside me and I just need to release it. Although that's just my interpretation of what's going on. Obviously, everyone's going to have their own interpretation, but I feel like a couple months ago, I saw this quote and it said, even the things that we do for the people we love is a little self-serving. And I'm like, I never thought of it like that before, because when you love somebody, you're so willing to do anything for them, but it brings you joy. It brings you happiness. It brings you contentment to see the people that you love getting the things that they need, or the things that they want, or giving them those feelings of happiness and joy. And I don't think we ever step back and think about that for a moment, that like everything we do is a little bit selfish. Although I think that in this moment, he had the most utter good intentions of telling her, like, I have feelings for you, I care about you. And he did it in a very, putting her first as a person, like being like, when I said that you mattered to me, Lucy, I meant that you, Lucy, mattered to me, not you as my tribute mattered to me. And I think that really proves to her that she is like not an object. She is a person. She is a human being, especially in this very objectifying world of not only women, but also of poverty-stricken people that are looked at as less than in their worldly view. This is the first time where you see him do an act of selflessness as well. And that's why I wanted to mention the selfish aspects, and I also wanted to mention the selfless. So Snow had no reason to do this other than love. He gave up his one true, meaningful piece of himself, of his mother, which is no longer, his mother's no longer here. It's the last thing he has of his mom, and gives it to Lucy. And she's like, no, I can't take this. Like, you know, it's his mother's compact mirror. And he holds this so dear to himself, and you see him talk about it repeatedly, and that this is a means of comfort for him, a means of safety, a means of love, undying love, right? And he gives it to Lucy because now, in a sense, she represents that to him, I feel like. And so, anyways, that's all I have to say for chapter 12. I'm going to move on to chapter 13, and I will update you guys when I am done. Today is day 7, and although I am wearing the exact same pajamas, I promise you it is the next day. I am just one of those people where I'm like, pajamas one day? Oh, let's just keep wearing them the next day. I am not done chapter 13. I'm actually only a few pages in. I still have all these pages to go before I hit chapter 14, but I wanted to update you guys because there was quite a few details that I wanted to say before we get into the juicy parts of the books. Coriolanus and Lucy said their final goodbyes, and guys, they kissed. Not once, but they went to go kiss twice, and the peacekeepers pulled her away. I was like, what does she see in them? Like, what does she see in him? But clearly, Lucy sees something in Coriolanus that we all don't. There's 24 tributes and 24 mentors for each tribute. And out of those 24, 10 are dead already before they're even entering the Hunger Games, which is a lot. They're going in there with very weird numbers because usually they go into the Hunger Games with all 24, and on the first day as many die as they die, and so on and so forth. But that only leaves 14 people going into the Hunger Games to fight. I'm going to keep reading. I just wanted to tell you guys that little part because I thought, Holy crap, this is insane. So I have another update. I haven't got to chapter 14 yet, but Dean Highbottom went on to Flickerman's show and he's having an interview. And he's like, Flickerman is insinuating that the capital children are better than the children from the districts. And Dean Highbottom is looking at Flickerman and he goes, only because they've had more access to money, access to better clothes, access to food. Then the conversation kind of trails off and Flickerman then changes the subject and he's like, that emotional mentor that you have, and he's referring to Sanjin, he's like, you might want to place him near the door. And I'm like, something's gonna happen. They're either gonna bring in Marcus because Marcus ran away. If they bring in Marcus because they caught him and they're gonna put him in the game, this is gonna be horrible. This is gonna be so sad, so horrible, because he ran away and you're hoping that he like got back to District 2 or that he is able to go and start a life somewhere out there outside. But I think they probably caught him and brought him back and that they're going to put him in the Hunger Games. And it's just not going to be a very happy moment for anyone reading this story. So I finished chapter 14. I'm moving on to chapter 15. And these are my opinions of what happened at the end of chapter 13, all the way to the end of chapter 14. And then they do the little Panem symbol on the screen. And then you can see all of the people on the screen standing on their podiums as the countdown starts to happen, right? It kind of shows the mentors, they're having discussions about their different tributes, and then you start getting into the game. So it's all from Snow's perspective of what he's seeing, and the camera pans up and Marcus is like hanging there, and Sanjin has this huge outburst, throws a chair at the screen, and then runs out. Snow watches the rest of the games, and basically it's just a bunch of people. They're trying to find people. It talks a lot about how the drones and mentors sending their tributes gifts, and the drones just like actively are not, there's like flaws in the code since this is the first time they're using the drones, and so some of them are crashing. The Capitol patrons, I guess you could say, are like, yo, that's not fair. Like, we're paying good money for this, and yet, you know, things are not going how they should be going. Yeah, so Snow watches the rest of the games. Not very much happens. A few people die, and not very many people. And then Snow goes home, and he's like, somebody's here, because, like, it smells like lavender tea. I think that's what he said. And that's something that they usually only give to like guests or people that are coming to their house. He walks in and Mrs. Blythe is there, which is Sanjin's mom. And she's like, I've been really worried. Sanjin hasn't returned home. And as they're having this discussion, something catches her eye on screen. And he's like, okay, well, I'll walk you back to your car. Like, what did she say? Coriolanus says, I bet you'll find Sanjin in bed. And then she goes, no, Coriolanus, said Miss Blythe in a hushed voice. No. She nodded at the screen. My boy's right there. So essentially he's in the Hunger Games somehow. I don't know how he would have got into the games. I don't know if it was like the Capitol putting him in there because of his outbursts and throwing something at the screen. And he said a lot of like stuff before he left Havensby Hall. He was like cussing, and he said that they were all monsters, or if Sanjin found a way to get into the games himself. Okay, so instead of checking in with you guys when I finished chapter 15, I read until the end of chapter 16, and basically what happened was Sanjin went into the arena, right? So they sent Coriolanus in to go get him. Coriolanus achieves this goal, gets Sanjin, brings him out, But before that, they get into an altercation with this guy named Bobbin, and Coriolanus kills him. They get out, they basically go home, they go to sleep. The next day, they get up, they go back to the like viewing place to watch the Hunger Games. They're watching the games. Sanjin goes up there with his father and says, whoever ends up winning the Hunger Games, we will pay for their college, like, tuition, essentially, like their schooling the next year. And Coriolanus is like, this is amazing, because then he won't have to worry about schooling and how much it will cost him, so on and so forth. The next thing that happens is they're watching the Hunger Games. There's about 10 tributes left in the game, so 10 mentors left as well in the whole race against who will win the prize money. So we're nearing the end of the games for the day, and Coriolanus is trying to decide whether or not he should send food to his tribute. And then as he's deciding this, Lucy Gray runs out of the tunnel, and Jessup is chasing her. And he realizes very quickly something is wrong with Jessup, and he's very sick, and he wonders if the rat poison that Lucy Gray put in the compact, which we don't really know if she did this or not. Coriolanus, like, loosely suggested it. I didn't even realize that he was making that suggestion until he mentioned it chapters later. And so I've known this for a couple chapters now, but I just didn't feel like it was that prevalent to mention. I didn't know how prevalent it was going to be in the story, but now I'm mentioning it now because it's been mentioned multiple times. But it's clear that he's sick with something else. So I am on chapter 17 now, moving on to chapter 18. I'll check in with you guys once I actually get to chapter 19, because that's been kind of seeming how much information I've been getting in the last couple chapters. It's very interesting, though, to see the Hunger Games being recounted to us, not from the tribute's perspective, but from the mentor's perspective, as well as the games being recounted from people viewing it on a screen, and rather than it actually happening to the person and around them in real time. So you're not getting very much information, because you're obviously only getting as much information as Snow is watching and as much as he's paying attention to. So I finished chapter 19. I read from chapter 17 to chapter 19. So now we're moving on to chapter 20. So where I last left off was Jessup was chasing Lucy Gray. We end up finding out that Jessup has rabies. During this whole situation, Coriolanus is like, what do I do? But yet he's not doing anything. He's just once again being like, okay. Then he remembers back in the wartime when rats were spreading rabies. He remembers that Lucy Gray mentioned when they were in the zoo still that Jessup was bit in the neck by something. And now he's like, oh, okay, it's rabies. So him and Lestrea, which is Jessup's mentor, and like I said, Coriolanus is Lucy's mentor, and although they're from the same district, they have two different mentors, which is completely different than the rest of the Hunger Games books, which I'm already realizing that this is going to have to be a two-part video, so I'm going to read this book in this video, and probably the rest of the books in the next video. Lestrea remembers that people with rabies get hydrophobia, which is a fear of water. So she decides that since Jessup is her tribute and he's going to die either way, she might as well protect Lucy. So she sends in a bunch of bottles of water. Jessup gets scared. He slips, falls, and ends up dying a slow death. Lucy comes down. She rubs his head and says, "It's okay, Jessup. I'll take the first watch," which essentially she's referring back to when they were in the zoo and they would take turns watching over each other. It was a really sad part in the book, probably the saddest part that has happened so far out of everything, because her best friend, someone from her district that she's now grown so attached to, that's her only friend throughout this whole thing, that's going through this with her, is now dead, and now she's alone. And Jessup was like bigger than her, so he was supposed to be her protector, her provider, so on and so forth, and now he's just dead. So Coriolanus and Listeria, however you pronounce her name, really bonded in this moment. She packed up her chair and left because now she's no longer a mentor and her tribute is dead. And they had a really sweet moment between themselves of their own goodbyes. Lucky Flickerman comes on the screen and he's like, did anyone else know about the rabies? And they're like, he must have brought it from the districts, which is literally impossible. Coriolanus knows it's from the rats. Everyone else has a rough idea that it was from the rats within the zoo because, as we saw in previous chapters, we're talking about rat poison, we're talking about rats, so on and so forth. That's where the rabies came from. But they're always trying to denounce that the fact that the capital is not perfect and that the capital does have disease and that it has illness and that it has these horrible things that happen within it. But of course, they're never going to say that, right? So then that was what basically happened in chapter 17. Coriolanus comes home and he has a conversation with Tigris about capital taxes. And essentially they are finding out that they are going to lose their home, that they cannot afford it if they do not find some way to pay the capital taxes. Coriolanus is like, well, I saved Sanjin's life when we went into the Hunger Games and I got him out of the Hunger Games. His parents owe me reparation for this task that I did for them. So he believes that he could go to Sanjin's parents and ask them essentially for money and see if they'll repay him and help him be able to pay the taxes so they don't lose their home, or they're going to have to sell their home and move into an apartment or a smaller house. He also mentions that like his grandma's immense pride, would she still be happy in a couple months from now if they're living in a smaller home? So then there's like this standoff between Reaper and Lamina, which are both tributes, and they both have food and water, and they decide they're gonna kind of help each other out. Lamina has water and she is looking awful. She's super sunburned. Reaper climbs up the flagpole where there's a flag of the Panem symbol, and he basically cuts a piece of the flag out. There's outrage among the crowd, and he brings the flag over to Lamina and allows her to basically wrap herself in it, and in exchange she gives him some of her food and water. They both sit there and just eat in peace and quiet, not battling, not arguing, not fighting, nothing. And this was a very big moment within the book because the capital is so outraged about a frickin' flag when children are dying. Like the atrocity of being so outraged about a flag compared to a human life is just absolutely so funny to me. So funny in like it's ridiculous type of way. On page 276, there's an altercation between Coral, Mizzen, and Tanner. Lamina took one last swipe at Coral and then moved swiftly for Mizzen. So also Coral or Lamina's there. And they basically fought, and during this altercation, Lamina died. She fell off the beam and died on impact. And then Tanner had made contact with Coral, drove the second trident into his back. He fell forward into Mizzen, so then Tanner is dead as well. Coriolanus wished Lucy Gray could see how many people loved her. He wished she knew how he advocated for her, pulling Lepidus over during quiet stretches and praising Lucy Gray to the skies. Her sponsor gifts had reached a new high, and he felt confident he could feed her for a week. There was really nothing left to do but wait and watch. So I had to change locations because it's quieter up here. Anyways, this is a part where I feel like it's super, super, super prevalent because it really shows the dynamic change. It shows the mentors showing immense care and respect for their tributes, as well as empathy, compassion, and The dynamics are shifting as they are working so closely with these tributes. Reaper wandered out of the barricade, rubbing sleep from his eyes. He seemed unable to make sense of the scene before him. So essentially, he's seeing all the dead bodies from the people that were killed, right? The stabbed bodies of Tanner and partially Lamina. After walking around them for a time, he lifted up Lamina and carried her over to where Bobbin and Marcus lay and arranged the three in a row on the ground. And then he dragged Tanner over beside Lamina. So essentially what he's doing is he's lining the bodies up in a row. The only body that he didn't line up was Jessup, because they, at least the mentors and everybody that's watching the games, believes this to be because he didn't want to contract rabies, or he was scared of contracting rabies. One of the mentors goes, "Oh, for heaven's sakes, feed him, Clemmy," which Clemmy is Clemencia, the girl that got bit by all the snakes. Something is happening there. Beforehand, she seemed a lot different than she is now. She's like a totally different person. And then she goes, "Mind your own business." Faustus replies back, "You're heartless." And she goes, "I'm a good manager. It could be a long Hunger Games." She gave Coriolanus an unpleasant smile, and it's not like I've abandoned him. Meanwhile, she hasn't given him food this whole entire game. She hasn't given him water this whole entire game. She's literally just doing absolutely nothing to help. So Coriolanus has these thoughts to himself about inviting her to the Citadel, which is the place where she got bit in the first place by the snakes, for his follow-up appointment. He could use some company and she could visit her snakes. Like, Coriolanus is so... Coriolanus was basically told that he needs to write another form of proposal or another type of paper, and he couldn't remember what it was about. He said, "Is it about chaos, control, or contracts? What is it about?" He knew it started with a C, but he couldn't remember what it was. This is while he's at the Citadel. And while he's there, he sees these two people, and they have a container of snakes. The snakes that actually bit Clemmy. And he's like, "Where are you taking the snakes to?" And the people tell him that they're taking them to another lab. And this is where we see another act of selflessness. I don't know if it's actually selflessness. We'll get into that. But he sees the snake tank and he's like, "I don't want Lucy Gray to end up like Clemmy. I don't want her to die. I don't want to lose." Mainly he was talking about her dying. But you also know that with her dying comes his loss of the grants that Sanjin's dad just proposed, as well as the loss of him being this iconic sensation that he wants to be so desperately, as well as the loss of a friend. So he drops the handkerchief that he gave to Lucy in the very beginning of the book and into the tank. It's just crazy. He cheated, like, so blatantly. And since he's the only one at the Citadel, he's the only one that had that opportunity to cheat. He's had so many different opportunities presented in front of him that none of his other mentors are getting. Why are you being presented with so many opportunities that your fellow mentors are not being presented with? And he has zero thoughts about the fact that he's being presented with these things, like, at all, which is weird, because, like, if you're in a position where you're getting more than your fellow mentors, wouldn't you be like automatically like, what is going on here? Why am I being given all these opportunities that no one else is? Anyways, that was the end of chapter 18. This is the start of chapter 19. He dropped the handkerchief in with Lucy Gray's scent on it. Right. He's having those internal thoughts. If they have her scent, there's a chance that they won't kill her. But then he's also backpedaling, where he's like, well, just because they have her scent doesn't mean that they won't kill her. Like, they could still potentially kill her, because who knows? So then he decides, after this all said and done, that he was going to go visit the Blythes, which is Sanjin's family, and see if they will repay him. So when he arrives there, Sanjin is sleeping. He is on all sorts of medications and stuff, because he is having a very hard time coping with the fact of Marcus's death. And Coriolanus is sitting there being like, they don't belong here, essentially. Like, You guys do not belong here. And he literally is telling Miss Blythe this, though. You guys don't really belong in the capital, so I can see why he's having a hard time. Although he's like praising her on how good of a cook she is, and like, it's just so weird, their types of dynamics that they have. And like, Miss Blythe is not disagreeing with him, like being like, no, we do belong here. She's like, no, we definitely don't belong here, but like, we are here, so we're trying to make the best of it. Then one of her AVOXes comes downstairs and like does some form of sign language and tells her that Mr. Blythe would like to see Coriolanus. And Coriolanus is like, okay, this is my chance in. I will get my money that is due to me for saving your child. And it's a very weird conversation. And Mr. Blythe is like, are you more like your dad or are you more like your mom type of situation? This is the conversation that they're quote unquote having. Coriolanus is like, I am like my mom in ways, but the only thing he alludes back to being like his mom is the fact that they share a fondness for music. That's about it. And the thing I don't understand is he wants to be with Lucy Gray and he's envisioned a future with her, but does he realize that Lucy Gray is also one of them? I don't think he does. I don't think he realizes that she would have the same struggles the Blythes are having in their day and age. Dr. Gwale basically announces that they have a special surprise for the district, for the tributes. As most of us know, if you're still watching this video, it was the snakes. She drops the snakes in, and the snakes all go slithering out everywhere, chasing people, and actually kill quite a few people. Lucy Gray then emerges from a tunnel, moving in a slow motion and backwards. She lifts each foot with care as she steps behind herself, swaying gently to the rhythm of her music. She's going la la la, so on and so forth. They realize the snakes are following her. They're actually, I don't know, they're following her. She goes to like this like marble slab and she like stands on it, and as the snakes swarmed her, the faded fabric vanished, leaving her with a brilliant skirt of weaving reptiles. So the snakes are now on her body. For what reason? And that was the end of chapter 19. Now we're moving on to chapter 20. That's me. I'm actually going to read chapter 20, 21, and 22. Update you guys when I'm done chapter 22 because less stuff is happening now, although a lot of stuff is happening at the same time. I'm almost done the Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes, and it's been such an amazing, good book. Highly, highly, highly recommend it, especially for people that were fans of the initial Hunger Games books. Okay, so I have 3 pages until I finish chapter 22. I'm going to update you guys on what happened anyways, and then I'll finish reading the rest of chapter 22, 23, 24, and 25. So there was like 3 contestants left in the Hunger Games, and it came down to the final 2, which was Reaper and Lucy Gray. Basically, Lucy Gray kept running back and forth to the point where Reaper got exhausted because Clemmy never gave him food, never gave him water, never really helped him out at all. He died, and Lucy Gray won the Hunger Games. Therefore, Coriolanus won the Hunger Games. So he's in this state of rejoicing and like being so happy. He's like, we won, she's alive, we're safe. Anyways, he gets called in by Dean Highbottom to go and speak to them. So he goes to speak to Dean Highbottom, and he's like, I know you cheated in the Hunger Games. He's like, you have 2 choices. You can either go back home and you'll end up getting arrested for cheating and lying, and your reputation will be ruined, or you can go and sign up to be a peacekeeper and leave and go be in one of the districts and work as a peacekeeper for 20 years, which is really a full circle moment, because if you remember at the very beginning of the book, Coriolanus kept saying like, what if I don't win? What if I become a peacekeeper, and like, how would my life be? And now he literally has no choice but to become a peacekeeper. So he runs to the peacekeeper sign up place and signs himself up, and it's like a 24-hour train ride, and he gets to District 12, which is very interesting. I thought he was going to a different district, but he ends up in District 12. And then he's like getting his bearings. He's meeting new friends and stuff like that. And then while he's there, Sanjin ends up coming to District 12 and being in the same bunk room as him. So they're bunk mates. And he's like, finally a familiar face, somebody that I know. He's like, I just couldn't stay in the capital. I couldn't deal. I couldn't be there. I needed to be back in the districts where I felt comfortable, where I felt familiarity. This is where it starts getting crazy. So Coriolanus and Lucy are in the exact same place now. Their interaction of them meeting again is going to be so interesting, and I wonder how that dynamic will be. There's so many things that the capital is capable of doing, and I like have all these thoughts like, are they going to brainwash Lucy to make her dislike Coriolanus? Has she been lying just to get through the games this whole time and been manipulating Coriolanus into being nice to her and helping her? Does she actually like him? Does she actually love him? Does he actually love her, or is he going to realize that he really didn't have all those feelings for her, and it was just like the games that got him swept up in these feelings and emotions? But anyways, Sanjin and Coriolanus get their first peacekeeper assignment, and it's basically a hanging, because this man killed 3 people by accident in the mines. And as soon as they said a man was being hanged, I'm way too happy about this, but like, oh my gosh, freaking Suzanne Collins is so fucking smart. I love this woman so much. I knew immediately what she was referencing, and I was like, no way, you did not reference that. But if you've been a Hunger Games fan from the very beginning, you know that Taylor Swift, go and look it up, Taylor's version, Taylor Swift Safe and Sound, because she re-recorded it, because she is so freaking smart. But Taylor Swift recorded Safe and Sound for the Hunger Games, the first Hunger Games movie, and it's in the Hunger Games movie. And Safe and Sound is not the song that I'm necessarily referencing, but that is a part of the whole song and the whole reference that I'm about to make. So if you remember, Katniss sang in the first movie and in the first book, she goes, are you coming to the tree where they strung up a man, they say that murdered 3. Strange things did happen here, no stranger would it be if we met at midnight in the hanging tree. I love that song because it's such a huge proclamation to the whole entire book, The Hunger Games. We all knew that this song meant something to Katniss, okay? Katniss's dad sang it to her when she was a little girl, and now we're having like a full circle moment where it's like being referenced so heavily, and the man that clearly committed these crimes is now going to be hung. And that's where I left off, is like they're on their way to this hanging, but I was like, oh my gosh, I need to get all this information out now, because I'm just like, what the heck? She did that, and she did it so beautifully of like portraying that. And like a lot of people have ideas of Lucy Gray being Katniss's like great grandma or grandmother. A lot of people also said they don't believe that it would have been Lucy Gray, but it would have been one of the people, the Covey people, that's her relatives or her distant relatives. But yeah, I'm gonna keep reading and I will update you guys. I'm done chapter 25. So I just finished reading chapter 25, and that means that we're moving on to chapter 26. Okay, bookmark. I see you falling out there. To update you guys on everything that's happened since where we left off. So Sanjin and Coriolanus end up going to the hanging, and during the hanging, this guy named Arlo So Arlo is the man being hanged. We don't know who Arlo is. All we know is that Arlo has a love called Lil. Don't know how that's connected to the Hunger Games or if it is, but it has to be in some way or form. After the whole hanging, Arlo's love gets pulled away by the peacekeepers and she's brought back to the barracks. That's what they call it. They call it the barracks, which is like a military base. Barracks is a military base. And she is like locked up there in prison because of their treason of putting bombs in the mines and blowing up the mines, therefore killing those 3 men. Okay. After that, it's the weekend, I believe, and all the peacekeepers decide that they're going to go down to the Hob, which we know what the Hob is already because it's been mentioned in the Hunger Games series. But it's just like a little place where people get together and they like listen to music and so on and so forth. And the Covey people are introducing themselves, and then Lucy Gray comes out and Coriolanus is like, oh my gosh, she's here. And he's like going over all these emotions and feelings, being like, are any of these guys up on stage with her, the guy that she was referring to in her song? And he's kind of jealous and happy and emotional, and like this is the first time where you truly know for a fact he loves this girl. Like he fully, undeniably is in love with Lucy Gray. But now we're going through the thing of, is she in love with him? And at first she doesn't notice him. She doesn't really pay attention. She's singing on stage, so of course she probably didn't see him at all. At the end of the performance, her cousin, Maud Ivory, comes up to them with a basket asking for donations, essentially. Coriolanus gives a few donations and then also gives her candy. And then she goes back up to Lucy Gray and she points at Coriolanus, and this is the first time they see each other and like have their little connection. However, they don't even get to speak at that moment. So there ends up being a huge fight. The lights turn out. Coriolanus gets punched in the face, and then they end up having to walk home the mayor's daughter, because the mayor's daughter and Lucy's ex-lover ended up going there together, and it turns out that they two are dating or together in some way or form. Sometime after that situation occurred, Sanjin and Coriolanus were allowed to go out on a day to like out in the district by themselves. Coriolanus and Sanjin end up finding where Lucy Gray lives, and they go and talk to Maud, and Maud shows them where Lucy Gray is at. And Lucy Gray is out in the meadow and she is playing guitar, and Coriolanus walks up to her and she is singing, Are you coming to the tree where they strung up a man, they say that murdered 3, which is the little blurb that I took in the last clip. She's obviously singing of Arlo. He's unsure why she's singing of Arlo, or if Arlo and her knew each other, or if she just heard it from the Mockingjays, because during the hanging, the Mockingjays started mimicking Arlo's death cries and saying what Arlo had said, which is, Lil, run. And he hangs out with Lucy Gray. They have their first encounter. They hug each other for a long time. They end up kissing multiple times. And then they go back to Lucy Gray's house. And while they're there, what's that guy's name? Billy? No. And his name is Billy Twop, or Tupois, or something like that. It sounds French. Billy comes to Lucy's house and he's like, I want my stuff, the rest of the stuff that he had left in the house. And while they're inside, they're kind of watching Billy like pick up his stuff and so on. And then Sanjin and Billy are having a conversation. Lucy and Coriolanus go outside to see what they're conversing about, but also to tell him to leave. And while they're having this conversation of telling Billy to leave, Coriolanus notices that Billy has drawn an outline in the sand and quickly comes to the conclusion that he has drawn in the dirt a map of the barracks, and the boys leave and go back to the camp. As they're walking, Coriolanus is getting mad at Sanjin because he's like, why are you associating yourself with this guy that clearly has rebel plans of some sort? Why does he want to get into the barracks? And Sanjin's like, am I conspirating, essentially? Like, am I going to get in trouble? And Coriolanus is like, I don't know, but like, whatever you're doing or whatever you're planning on doing, you need to not do it because you will. Anyways, they go back. Coriolanus decides he's going to write a letter to Dr. Gwale because he's like, what else do I have to lose? It's like, dude, you have this quote unquote love of your life in front of you, and now you're messaging somebody in the Capitol for what reason? Like, are you trying to go back to the Capitol? What is your plan here? Like, why do you want to do this when you're literally having everything you've ever desired right in front of you? Coriolanus decides he's going to do this peacekeeper test because he wants to become a well-respected officer like his father was, and he thinks that if he does become a well-respected officer like his father was, it will help him move up the rankings, and therefore maybe he can establish a life back in the Capitol. Which is like, once again, like, are you not realizing that you would have to leave her behind? Do you rather love over a career or career over love? It just is so confusing to me, and maybe because it conflicts with myself and I would choose love over a career. Maybe that's just me, but you've literally have been pining after this girl for months, and when you finally get back together, now you're like, I really want to go back to the Capitol. It's like, why? Like, nothing is there for you anymore. Tigress has messaged him and sent him a note home, like, a couple chapters back, and said that they are living above like Pilbaris's store because they have nowhere else to go. And not just that, their grandma is losing her memory. And so like, you going back there is not going to help their situation. And of course, I am not telling you every single little thing that happens in each and every chapter because there's no point. I just share the big details that I found interesting or that I am finding, information in. And he starts kind of going through Sanjin's stuff. I don't know why he thought this was like appropriate to do, because like, yes, Sanjin is your friend, but like, really, Coriolanus doesn't view Sanjin as a friend. Like, Sanjin views Coriolanus as a friend. Their friendship has always been weird. He's like saying like Sanjin's loyalties lie with the districts, which I mean, yeah, he was raised in the district, so of course his loyalties will always lie with the district people. And then he goes on and he finds Sanjin's diploma, and he opens the back of it because he sees a little green slip and finds a bunch of money, hundreds of thousands of dollars of money in the back of his picture frame where his diploma is placed. And he's like, why does he need all this money? We make enough money on a peacekeeper salary. Is Sanjin having this money because he wants to protect himself if he does something stupid? Or even if we go to the black market, which is referred to a lot in the Hunger Games, where Katniss sells her game, or she buys stuff from the black market to feed them. And so why does he need all this money? Usually people only need that amount of money if they're trying to like harbor secrets or keep things hidden, so on and so forth. I think he's low-key insinuating that he thinks that Sanjin is trying to create a rebellion or start a war or something like that, which wouldn't surprise me with Sanjin, but it's just like, have some faith in the kid. He doesn't know how bad it could get. And also, I think he just wants the best for the people, honestly. I think he just really has good intentions, just doesn't know how to actually prosecute them, if that makes sense. Yeah, so that's kind of where I left off, and they're just kind of all in the room at this moment. I will update you guys once I finish reading chapter 27. yeah. And yeah, that's how much pages we have left. So I could easily finish this book today. I kind of hope I do, to be honest. Okay, so I have 12 pages left of chapter 27, and after I am done reading chapter 27, I'm going to read all the way up to the epilogue, and then I will update you guys what is happening in the storyline. But I want to update you guys what happened from the chapters before up until current point now, which is middle some of chapter 27. So at this moment in time, a lot of stuff has taken place since what I last said, but it's not really that prevalent to the storyline. What I do want to say is prevalent though. So Coriolanus and Lucy Gray, as well as a bunch of other Covey people, decided that they're going to go into the forest to the lake. And this lake is the same lake that Katniss references where her dad brought her as a kid. So now we have a direct confirmation that Katniss's dad had to have been one of the Covey people. And I believe, so he could be Tam Amber or Clerk Carmine, because those are the only men that are really mentioned that much. Or I think though it's Clerk Carmine, and the reason why I think it's Clerk Carmine, which I'll get into in a second, is because there's a huge reference to, they're going to the lake in the woods, they all decide to swim, Sanjin's there too, so they're all just like swimming, even Maud Ivory is there, so they're all just like having a fun time. And then this is where you see Coriolanus and Lucy Gray get into their first little conversation of debate regarding the capital and the Covey and the districts. And they're basically talking about how Coriolanus believes that if there wasn't structure and there wasn't the capital, there would be chaos. And I think that a lot of people in general believe that if we don't have a government, we will dissolute into chaos. And I don't disagree with that. I think that any person that consciously thinks about the world in its current state and how things would affect us as people and human beings in a large majority knows that without structure, without laws, without regulations, that there would be chaos, because people would just start doing whatever they wanted. And it's also very like, it just really shows that a lot of people lack basic ethics, because if you need the laws in order to just do what's right, there's something wrong with you. And I am saying that so bluntly. Some people will get offended at this, but I have the same exact mindset for people that say, if you're not religious and you don't follow a religious construct, how do you know right from wrong? Or how do you like have a moral grounding? It's like, you shouldn't need some form of organization or some form of rules and regulations to be a good person. Like, to just not do things that are absolutely barbaric. But nonetheless, there is people out there that exist that simply do not do certain things because there's laws in place to prevent them from happening, which is just so fucking crazy to me. But also just a matter of like, they don't want to get in trouble. It's like, what? Going back to the conversation that Coriolanus and Lucy Gray were having, Lucy Gray's like, well, we're not capital, we're not peacekeepers, we're not district, we're not any of these things. We are the Covey people, and I don't believe it's right to be forced into a situation and be killed because you're standing up for what you believe in. Both her parents were killed because they fought back against the capital, saying that they didn't want to be part of these systems. And I feel like this is really prevalent in our society. If you look at like Native Americans or Native Canadians, how they were very much taken from the land, forced into situations that were just disgusting. It's the same thing with any form of genocide or any form of slavery where people were stolen from their land and then forced into Western civilization. It very much so gives that. I love that Suzanne Collins put this in her novel to show this, because a lot of people, I feel like, believed that Katniss is supposed to be African American, and Katniss is extremely white. And I don't have a problem with that, in my opinion, because we see in the movie that Katniss's mom is white. That doesn't mean that her dad is not black or of some form of person of color. And I firsthand know this because I am a person of color. Like, I am biracial. My mom is black, my dad's white. I look like this. So I feel like it's just different representation. Like, every single person of color looks different. And I constantly I'm very, I guess, racially ambiguous. And so a lot of people think I'm white, or a lot of people think I'm Hispanic, or a lot of people will just have an idea that I am some form of person of color, but not everyone knows what that form of person, they don't know what race I am, essentially. So therefore, I think a lot of people have a problem with Katniss being white passing or white presenting or whatever, but I don't see a problem with it. I think that, if anything, it just shows my more diversity among that people of color look all different types. Not just that, it's very, very clear that Lucy Gray is a person of color, and that majority of the Covey people are going to be people of color. And I think it's so amazing to have more interracial representation in the media, because I feel like we do have a lot of interracial representation in certain ways, in certain forms, but not enough. Like I was saying, the whole situation in itself is very much so giving like freedom. And she basically claps back at Coriolanus and is like, you have the same fight in you. You wanted the same thing. You sat there and fought against the Capitol when you cheated in the Hunger Games. Like, this is kind of their conversation. I'm just paraphrasing. And he's like, yeah, I did do that, but I didn't do it like Sanjin. And I'm like, it doesn't matter your way of convicting or your way of proceeding with that mindset. You still have that same mindset. You still want that same fight. You still believe those same things. And he doesn't agree with the Hunger Games, and he's saying that to her, but his actions and words are also saying otherwise. And I think he is honestly just very, very confused. And she's getting very frustrated with him because, like, of course she is. She's like, you know, like, my parents died fighting for their freedom. And I think Coriolanus is also just as upset and frustrated because his parents also died fighting for their freedom and fighting for their safety. And his mom really died just being a civilian, but like his dad was an officer and fighting in the war and died. So they both have valid points. They both have these valid concerns and these valid feelings. And it's very hard because Coriolanus's dad took an active participant in fighting in the war and wanted to be a part of that. And Lucy Gray's parents didn't have the choice in the matter. That's what I think Coriolanus is missing mainly, is that they were forced against their will, and the Capitol still had a choice in the matter. While this conversation is taking place, Clerk Carmine comes up to Lucy Gray, and he has this beautiful white flower. He goes, it's a Katniss root, which literally Katniss Everdeen. Katniss was named after those white flowers that were around the pond. Her dad named her after the Katniss route because he loved them so much. And I am almost 100% positive that has to be Katniss's dad, because it's just too coincidental. It's way too coincidental. And so as soon as I figured that out and I read that, I was like, that has to be her dad. Clerk Carmine has to be Katniss's dad. Therefore, he has to be a Covey, because yeah, I'm sure other people knew about the whole... Clerk Carmine also has a brother, which is Billy Twabe or something. I don't know. But it's got to be Clerk Carmine. And I'm like, that... Although his name is not Everdeen, and that Everdeen has to come from somewhere, because Katniss Everdeen. Everdeen is clearly her last name. Like, did she take her mom's last name? Did her dad, like, change his name? Like, what happened there? Or maybe her dad's somebody all completely different, but I feel like that is way too coincidental for it to be not accurate. I'm really interested to see where the storyline goes from here. I'm going to read the rest of chapter 27 and I will update you guys when I get to the epilogue. I'm not to the epilogue yet, but I just got to a part in the book. I'm on page 437, and Lucy Gray stroked Maud Ivory's hair back behind her ear and waited for her to settle down before she began to sing soothingly. Deep in the meadow, under the willow, a bed of grass, a soft green pillow. Lay your head down and close your sleepy eyes, and when again they open, the sun will rise. Here it's safe, here it's warm. Here the daisies guard you from every harm. Here your dreams are sweet, and tomorrow brings them true. Here is the place where I love you. This song is another song that Katniss sings to Prim. I can't remember when, but I know that she sings it to her, I think, multiple times in the Hunger Games story, because I remember deep in the meadow, hidden far away, a cloak of leaves, a moonbeam ray, forget your woes and let your troubles lay, and when again it's morning, they'll wash away. But I really remember the first part where it goes, deep in the meadow, under the willow, a bed of grass, a soft green pillow. Though she does sing it to her multiple times. But anyways, that's another little connection of, like, her dad sang her a lot of songs. Katniss also mentions her dad has to be here during all these situations happening, you know, or has been around. Okay, I'm back for another update. Although I'm not even close to the epilogue yet. I believe Billy is Clerk Carmine's brother. So I found out that all of their names are from ballads. So they're all from songs. So that suggests that none of their names are their real names. So Billy Twope could have changed his last name to Everdeen, or Clerk Carmine could have changed his last name to Everdeen. It's got to be one of the two brothers that's Katniss's dad. And Lucy Gray tells Coriolanus that Billy Twope came to the field, her meadow, which is the meadow that's also by Katniss's house, where she sneaks through the fence to the woods, and asked her to run away with him, meet him at the hanging tree, and run away with him to somewhere in the woods, which is literally the same thing that Gale suggests to Katniss, that they just run away somewhere in the woods and live. So it's very much like a full circle moment. Once again, there's so many full circle moments in this book where I'm like, you are just an impeccable writer. And so Coriolanus is a little worried about this. He's like, should I get so attached to her? Is she going to run away with him? And Lucy Gray kind of roughly says to him that trust is more important than love. And I do agree with her statement. Like, trust is the foundation of love. And she says that she can't trust Billy because Billy basically was dating the mayor's daughter and her at the same time. And she can trust Coriolanus, though. And then they kiss, and then so on and so forth. So I'm going to keep reading. Hopefully there will be no more updates until I get to the epilogue. We are nearing the end of this video, and I am incredibly sad that this video is coming to an end. I'm very thankful though that there will be a part 2, but I am definitely upset and sad. So I just reached the epilogue, and there's so much that happened from what I last said to what is currently happening in the book. Let me update you guys. So first things first. Coriolanus manipulated St. John into him telling the truth. He's like, we're like brothers. I view you as a brother. I view you as a brother. And then St. John was like, listen, there is a group of rebels. They're planning on running away from the districts. And among that group was Billy Topat or Toupee or Taupe or something like that. And Coriolanus decided, because they had been rounding up jabberjays, mockingjays, and they're trying to round up these birds because Coriolanus had suggested in a couple of chapters earlier that they should round them up and kill them. And Dr. K decided that she wanted to round them up and bring them back to the capital. Well, anyways, during this conversation, Coriolanus thought it would be a good idea for him to record their conversation and send it back to the capital. It's just so messed up because from the very beginning, he's had this love-hate relationship with St. John where he's like, you're my friend, but then you're not my friend, and I care about you, but you're also a burden on me, and you put me in these horrible situations, which all is correct, but it's just so messed up. And so Coriolanus is just a big freaking hypocrite. Like, honestly, he's such a huge hypocrite, and it's just, it's so infuriating. It's so infuriating. As soon as you feel like he's redeeming himself and like he's a good person, he fucking turns around and does the complete opposite. So anyways, he sends that bird off to the capital. He's like, is something going to come of it? Is nothing going to come of it? What could potentially happen? Then they end up going to another one of the Hob concerts where Lucy Gray is singing and the Covey people are singing. During this, Coriolanus sees St. John leave, and he had already known that St. John was like planning on helping this person like break their sister out of the jail, and that he had like these rebel ideas of like doing so. And I think that's what even more so perpetuated him to turn him into the capital. And so St. John sneaks out and Coriolanus follows him, and he's meeting with Billy, and St. John or Coriolanus realizes that they're exchanging money for guns, and it's just like a really messed up situation. I'm not exactly sure what happened, but Coriolanus ends up killing one of the people. He kills Mayfair, which is the mayor's daughter. And also Billy ends up getting killed as well. Then the guns are taken by this other guy, and just, we don't know what happens with the guns. Coriolanus is sitting there for the next couple days really worried about the guns and what's going to happen with them, and if they resurface, and the possibilities of that happening and how it would affect him. And he's really worried about St. John and like his potential difficulty with this like a whole bird situation, but also the potentiality of him getting mixed up in this whole situation. And so St. John ends up getting found out that he, committed treason, and him and Lucy Gray go to the hanging. St. John dies. It is the most messed up part in this whole entire book. Then I would say a couple days after St. John is killed, Lucy Gray comes to the barracks with the Covey and performs for this colonel guy. And it's his birthday, so they're celebrating. Lucy Gray performs a song for Coriolanus. Then they meet up, and she says, I'm going to run away because the mayors think that it was her that committed the crime. And he will not give it a break. He's stalking her everywhere, essentially, and she's really scared. So then they plan for tomorrow leaving. She gets back on stage and she performs the hanging tree. And so he's like, okay, she wants me to meet her at the hanging tree. And he's still having these jealous thoughts about like this song being about Billy and like whatever. And so then the next day he wakes up, he eats food, he goes to the hanging tree and meets her there. And she's wearing this orange scarf that Coriolanus gave her. And he's like, I'm wearing this so you could find me. As they're walking, because she's like, we should stop at the lake first because I want to see it one last time. And he's like, that's a good idea. She's talking about how she's taken lives. And then Coriolanus happens to mention he's taken 3 lives this year. And then she's like, who's the third? Because you've taken 2. You've taken Bobbins, and now you've taken Mayfair's. Who's the third? And she doesn't realize that it's Sanjin. But I think she came to the conclusion really quickly because Coriolanus gave a stupid excuse saying it's the old Coriolanus. Like, what does that... The old Coriolanus is dead. He can't come to the phone right now. Like, this is not a Taylor Swift song. What are you doing, sir? And so, anyways, he's like, says that weird remark, and then they go to this house where, actually, I'm pretty sure Gail and Katniss go there, or it's Peeta and Katniss go there. But it's like a little house that's by the little pond or whatever. And when they go inside, Coriolanus realizes that the guns that were used to kill Mayfair and Billy were stashed there. And he's like, I can have my freedom back. I can go back to the barracks. I can go to District 2. Because before this, he had been told that he was assigned to go to District 2 because he did an officer test, and now he's like going to be like a higher officer at a different district. But instead of doing that, he chose Lucy Gray and to go with Lucy Gray. But as soon as he realizes that he can have his freedom back, he's like, is love what I want? Is this what I want? Is love more important? It's like, dude, like, what are you doing? Like, he really has zero clue of what he wants from life, like, at all. He's like, one minute he's like, I said this at the beginning of this whole entire video. One minute he's like this, the next minute he's like this. It's like so back and forth, so confusing. He has no clue what he is doing. Lucy Gray's like, I'm gonna go out by the river and pick some Katniss root. And after a while pass, Coriolanus is like, it doesn't take that long. Like, what is going on? So then he picks up one of the guns and he goes outside and he basically starts chasing her around in the woods, trying to find her and like calling out her name and stuff. And he's like, I'm not going to kill her, but she's the only one that knows of this crime left, like the crime. And so he's going through the woods and stuff. And then he finds the scarf that Lucy Gray had on, and he like goes to reach for it and a snake bites him. And he's like, well, Maud Ivory, I'm like trying to remember these names. I'm pretty sure it's Maud Ivory, said that Lucy Gray always knows where to find the snakes. He thinks it's a poisonous snake. He starts freaking out. And then he starts shooting his gun rapidly through the woods, trying to like kill her. And he thinks he kills her, but then he doesn't know. And then he goes back to like the little house in the woods and then grabs all the guns, puts them in the pond at the very bottom, and then takes his dad's compass and runs back to the barracks. So he basically just leaves her there, not knowing if she's dead, alive, where she's at, if she left intentionally, if something happened to her beforehand. Like, literally did not think about anything else besides himself. It's crazy to me. And then also, while he was like running through the woods after her, he started singing the hanging tree song. Like, he was losing his mind. And so he goes back to the barracks, right? And a doctor checks him over and he's like, this is not a poisonous snake. Like, you're going to be fine. Gives him a couple steroid shots, everything like that. The next day he gets on this aircraft, and when he wakes up, he realizes that they're not in District 2, but they're in the capital. And he's like, did I sleep too long? What happened? And they're like, no, like, this is where you're supposed to go. So, you need to go. And then he gets put on like a shuttle bus or like almost something like that, and he gets brought to the Citadel. And when he goes to the Citadel, he meets with Dr. Gwale, and Dr. Gwale's like, basically is like, you really thought that like I was gonna just throw away like my star pupil, quote unquote. And Dr. Gwale essentially tells him like, I sent you away for the summer on purpose to gather more information, and what's your opinion now that you've been in the districts? And he's like, well, the district people can't even watch the Hunger Games, and if you want them to watch the Hunger Games, it's going to have to be enforced. And then he also said that he realized that like they can't survive without the Capitol. Like, he essentially said that, and also that they needed the Capitol so there was no chaos, and that there was control and structure and so on and so forth. And that's kind of where I left off, and now I'm moving into the epilogue, which I'm very excited to read, but also I'm like, this book has been insane overall. It's such a good book. I highly recommend it. I absolutely cannot wait to film my book review of this book, but I've really enjoyed filming these reading commentary videos a lot for you guys, and I hope that you guys really enjoyed this video so much, and I will update you guys once I am done the epilogue. It ironically took me 12 days to finish this book. 12 days for the 12 districts, which is so interesting. I love the concept of that. Last night I finished the epilogue. I just decided that I wasn't gonna finish recording last night. Oh my gosh. My final words about this book is that, once again, Suzanne Collins is an exceptional writer. She comes up with exceptional stories. I'd love to read any other book that she has written because she is that amazing. Her and John Green, to me, are equivalent, where they're just like such good writers. Reading this book compared to The Hunger Games, which I will be reading the Hunger Games series in my next part of this video. So what I'm going to do for that video is I'll read half a book, and then I'll update you guys, and then read the other half and update you guys, because I've read these books so many times. I know the storyline like the back of my hand. I am just so thankful for storylines like this, where it's artistic, informative, fictional, and just like you can connect so well with the characters. However, I didn't feel like I really connected with Coriolanus or Lucy, but I still loved their stories and how their storyline was written. I just loved it so much. Anyhow, what happened in the epilogue is that after Coriolanus went to the Citadel, he started working under Dr. Gwale, and he essentially became a head game maker. And so they wiped the complete history of the 10th Hunger Games, and Dr. Gwale is the only one that has a copy of the 10th Hunger Games. And from there, basically, because they wiped like the history of the 10th Hunger Games and stuff like that, Coriolanus just went back to living regular life. And because he's like a head game maker now and he's making all this money, they're able to stay in the penthouse and not have to give up that life. Kind of left on a cliffhanger though, because I want to know how Coriolanus and Tigris got to the point of like no longer having a relationship. And I don't know if Suzanne Collins is going to write a second, like a series of this, of like Snow's life, because I want to know how he went from being head game maker to becoming president. And I want to know how him and Tigris's relationship kind of trailed apart and like they stopped communicating. I want to know what happened to Lucy Gray after that whole situation, and if she went on to live life for the rest of her life, and maybe she is Katniss's grandma, or maybe one of the other Covey people like Clark Carmaine is her dad. Like, I want to know those things. And I think she very easily could come up with other storylines, and who knows, maybe she will, or maybe she is. And like I said at the very beginning of this video, I really want to see a sequel to Mockingjay of, like, what happened after. Like, I want to actually know about their lives and how they're living and how they're functioning and stuff like that. Like, I know the concept of the books is all about the Hunger Games, but I just want to know those details so much, like, you know. And I literally would read a whole spin-off series just about Lucy Gray's life and what else happened to Snow. He kind of honestly just got his life back to complete normal, and the Blythes kind of take care of him in a sense and really help him out. And it's kind of messed up because he is responsible for Sanjin's death, and it's like, dude, like, you killed their son, and now you're just like, I don't know. I guess Coriolanus has, like, these really messed up instincts in himself that, like, you would not see unless you were really paying attention to it. And the fact is, like, at the end of the day, most of the people in his lives are never going to know that he's responsible for taking 3 lives and that he is this anti-capital but also capital person. For somebody that has really, he has really complicated morals and very confusing constructs within himself where he's very contradictory. But I feel like as human beings, we are super contradictory. Like, we are so capable of saying one thing and doing one thing, but when it comes down to our safety or protecting ourselves or being put in situations that we just don't really know how to handle, we can very quickly contradict ourselves or even just make decisions that we wouldn't necessarily make otherwise. So I really enjoyed reading this book a lot, and I absolutely cannot wait for you guys to watch the second half of this video. Thank you so much, guys, for liking, sharing, subscribing, and make sure to check out all of my other content down below in the description box. And I will be posting a book review of The Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes very shortly after this, so make sure to check that out too. Have a good day, guys.